The Vietnamese guy, clearly confused, couldn't understand what I was telling him, even though I needed to get the details from him. Just when I thought he finally understood and started to speak, I couldn't understand him this time. As time passed frustratingly, Chloe sighed. This is troublesome. We need to hear the story quickly while his memory fresh. It'll take time to arrange an interpreter. Isn't there anything we can do? Chloe sighed and glanced at me. Seeing her pleading eyes, I made up my mind. My name is Chris. I'm 30 years old. Currently, I work as a paralegal, assisting lawyers at a law firm. A lot has happened before I came here. There are dreams I've given up on. However, I believe I'm experiencing the most peaceful moments right now. Excuse me, I've finished the documents you asked for, I said as I handed the documents to the male lawyer. He just glanced at the documents and said, "Thanks, I'll check them later," then turned back to his computer screen. But then, hey, what's with that cold attitude after asking favor from my paralegal? Take a proper look at his work, Chloe said assertively. She's the lawyer I'm assigned to. Indeed, I'm Chloe's paralegal, but occasionally I help out other lawyers like this. The male lawyer hurriedly flipped through my documents and praised me for doing a good job. Of course, Chris is amazing. Chloe praised me as usual. Chloe has been showing remarkable achievements since she passed the bar exam at the age of 24 and currently handles requests from several clients as a talented lawyer. Despite being such an amazing person, for some reason, she appreciates me. She showed me the same attitude when I first visited the office for my job interview. As soon as Chloe saw me, she greeted me with a big smile, and she and the director interviewed me. The law firm was looking for a paralegal to replace Chloe's previous paralegal, who had passed the bar exam and resigned. They asked about my brief background and gave me a short law-related test. It was a very simple test. I was hired on the spot. Honestly, I was confused if I was good enough, but Chloe said with a smile, "I'm happy to work with you." I can never thank Chloe enough. Since then, Chloe praises me for even the smallest things, saying, "You did well," or "That's amazing." To be honest, I've lost a lot of confidence lately, so I can't accept her compliments straightforwardly. Every time I'm praised, a strange wry smile escapes me. At first, it felt like I had gained a very kind older sister, but after working here for 3 months and constantly being with Chloe, I've fallen for her. When she smiles at me, my heart races. However, a talented lawyer and a mere paralegal assistant are as different as chalk and cheese. My love for her is my reason to live, but I try not to show those feelings. Then one day, someone brought a difficult case involving a Vietnamese national who reportedly speaks a little English, but it was uncertain whether he could effectively communicate legal matters. Then there shouldn't be any problems. Let's go. Chloe quickly finished her preparations and left the office with a flourish. I hurriedly followed after her. While on the move, we reviewed the defense details. Whoa, this is... I was at a loss for words. We need to somehow get a reduced sentence, Chloe said, frowning. The Vietnamese guy had played a part in a wire fraud scheme. He was recruited as a money mule and had withdrawn cash using someone else's ATM card. In recent years, wire fraud schemes have been on the rise and can result in severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment. A money mule can face criminal charges and potentially be sent to jail even if it is their first criminal offense. While some first-time offenders may receive alternative sentencing options, others may face substantial legal consequences depending on the discretion of the court and the prosecution. The Vietnamese man we met was Mr. Nguyen. As soon as he met with Chloe, he kept repeating, "I didn't think it was a crime." He clearly confused, couldn't understand what I was telling him, even though I needed to get the details from him. Just when we thought he finally understood and started to speak, we couldn't understand him this time. As time passed frustratingly, Chloe sighed. This is troublesome. We need to hear the story quickly while his memory fresh. It'll take time to arrange an interpreter. Isn't there anything we can do? Chloe sighed and glanced at me. Seeing her pleading eyes, I made up my mind. I spoke to Mr. Nguyen in Vietnamese. Mr. Nguyen looked surprised for a moment, but then his eyes lit up and he started talking rapidly. He was so excited that I had to ask him to speak a little slower so I could understand him. Chloe also looked surprised, her eyes wide open. I didn't really want her to hear my poor Vietnamese, but this wasn't a situation where I could worry about that. I communicated with Mr. Nguyen in Vietnamese. Mr. Nguyen's story was pitiful. Life in his home country was tough, so he applied for the seasonal farm work program to earn money. However, his employer didn't pay him what was supposed to be paid, and after sending money to his family in Vietnam, he had almost nothing left. That's when he was recruited for an easy part-time job by the culprit. The culprit said that all he had to do was withdraw cash at the ATM. When he asked why, the culprit explained that he was doing this on behalf of elderly people who had difficulty walking. He never doubted that story. He even thought he was helping people. He withdrew the cash with high spirits and handed it over to the culprit. The elderly might be surprised if a foreigner shows up, so I'll give them the cash later, the culprit told him. Mr. Nguyen was a little disappointed that he couldn't see the happy faces of the elderly people he thought he was helping. Then, the culprit paid Mr. Nguyen a few $100s as compensation. However, the culprit paid Mr. Nguyen few $100s as compensation. He found it strange, but he was so elated at getting cash for just that, he ignored his doubts. As a result, he was later identified from the ATM's security camera and arrested by the police. I didn't know anything, Mr. Nguyen kept repeating. That was probably true. I clenched my fists. I was shaking with anger. Wasn't Mr. Nguyen a victim too? However, even if he didn't know, it still counts as theft. Here's no such thing as an easy way to earn hundreds of dollars just for withdrawing cash on someone's behalf. When I told him that, he hung his head dejectedly. Then, concerned about the elderly person, he tearfully apologized. The amount he had withdrawn was $5,000. Afterwards, he lost contact with the culprit who had recruited him for the job. Although we finally got to hear the details, it didn't change the fact that it was a criminal case. After the meeting, we decided to return to the office once. On the way, Chloe kept looking at me intently. I didn't know you could speak Vietnamese too. I thought it was just English, she muttered, and I frowned. Huh? You never asked me if I could speak Vietnamese either, did you? I never told the director either. As I grew flustered, Chloe sighed. Well, I guess it's fine. Her words made no sense to me, and my frown deepened. Actually, your grandma asked me to. What? My eyes widened. It's true that I currently live with my grandmother, just the two of us. Asked you to what? From where? As I grew more confused, Chloe smiled. To explain that, I need you to tell me about your past. Chris, who graduated from Stanford University and has a Washington State lawyer's license. My eyes widened even more. How much did she know about me? I got a little scared, but Chloe was smiling. Encouraged by her gaze full of affection, I started talking bit by bit. Due to my parents' work, I had been living abroad since the 3rd grade of elementary school. I spent 3 years in Vietnam, then moved to Dubai, and finally returned to the United States when my father got promoted. After returning from abroad, I found a dream to pursue. I wanted to become a lawyer and help those in weaker positions. Both Dubai and the United States, where many immigrants live, face various problems, both big and small. I wanted to be there for the people of America, where I was born and raised, and for the people of Vietnam, who took care of me for 3 years. With that dream, I started studying hard from that day on. To be an ally for those in weaker positions, I had to be strong myself. After enrolling at Stanford University, I went on to Stanford Law School and obtained a Washington State lawyer's license. Here, the big hurdle was the quota. At first, I couldn't get work on my own and had to receive cases from my seniors to meet the quota. Being a litigious country, there were many cases, but I didn't have the luxury of taking my time with each one. The pressure to meet the quota by handling case after case made me start focusing on efficiency. Then, a turning point came. I thought it was a case I could win. However, the other party's evidence and logic were stronger than mine. They targeted a pitfall I had overlooked, and I ended up losing without putting up much of a battle. The client was furious and dismissed me as their lawyer. I was furious with myself too. It was a part I could have noticed and taken measures against if I had dealt with it more carefully. In my pursuit of efficiency and overconfidence in winning, I had forgotten what was most important. The moment I realized that, I judged that I wasn't cut out to be a lawyer. That's what I decided. Far from helping the weak, I was neglecting them. This wasn't the job I had dreamed of. A letter arrived for me when I was exhausted. It was from my grandmother. Upon hearing about my situation from my parents, my worried grandmother had sent me a letter. "You can come back anytime." The moment I saw those words, my heart trembled. I naturally shed tears at her neat handwriting, and I found myself whispering, "I want to go back to my childhood days." My childhood memories were limited to up until the 3rd grade of elementary school, and going back once a year at most. At that time, my maternal grandmother was the only one still alive, and she always welcomed me with a smile. She always warmly welcomed and loved me. I wanted to go back to that place. And so, I resigned from the law firm and started living with my grandmother, just the two of us. For the first few months, I spent my days in a daze. I enjoyed the delicious meals my grandmother made, spent all day sitting on the porch reading books while looking at the flowers in the garden, and sometimes helped my grandmother with her gardening. The flowers my grandmother grew were all vibrant and blooming beautifully, and I could feel the love in them. My grandmother often called it my self-regaining period. Spending days surrounded by flowers was truly warm and peaceful, and I felt my heart being filled. As my mental health gradually recovered and I considered starting a part-time job, I was reading a local newspaper that my grandmother had picked up when she handed me her smartphone. Though she was 80 years old, your grandmother loved new things and was quite adept at using her smartphone. My grandmother handed me her phone with a job posting from the law firm on the screen. "Grandma, right now, I'm not really into legal stuff." As I tried to decline vaguely, my grandmother smiled and traced the words paralegal with her finger, saying, "They have these kinds of jobs now." Of course, I knew that. While I was still active as a lawyer, I used to avail their assistance, and I was still thankful to them. "I think legal work suits you, Chris," she said. Reluctantly, you took your grandmother's smartphone and looked at the job posting. Paralegal, a lawyer's assistant. There were times when you had dumped all the preliminary research on the paralegals for the sake of efficiency. If their research was sloppy, you could lose even a winnable case. You understood the importance of this job better than anyone. If you had done careful research as a paralegal, would the mistakes you made one day be forgiven? As you were looking at the jobs posting screen with such naive thoughts, your grandmother popped her head out from beside you and tapped on a particular law firm, saying, "This one looks good, doesn't it? No harm in trying," she said, pressing the apply button. "Huh? Wait. Hold on." As I panicked, my grandmother smiled and said, "It's fine. Look here. It says, 'We welcome applicants keen to details.' It's perfect for you, Chris." I stared at the screen. It certainly aligned with my principles. My grandmother smiled, looking satisfied. "If you try going for an interview, it might open up a path for you," she said nonchalantly. In the end, I searched for that law firm on my own smartphone and applied. Out of all the law firms, this was the one my grandmother had randomly tapped on. "That's the firm I work at now." "Huh? Wait, what?" I was set up. After finishing my story and looking at Chloe, she had a big smile on her face. "Maybe so," she said, looking very amused. "Actually, my family home is 2 houses down from your grandmother's. I live alone now, though." You were utterly surprised by her words. "What?" Chloe listened to your surprised cry with a satisfied look and laughed. "My parents were busy, and when I was in 5th grade, they became confident that I was old enough to stay at home alone. So there were times I had to eat dinner by myself." Chloe's expression turned a little sad. When she was little, they did come home early, but during long vacations like summer break, I ate lunch that my mother prepared in advance and spent the whole day alone. Although my mother asked a few of her friends to look after me, I was hesitant to rely on them too often. Growing accustomed to being alone, Chloe spent her time at home watching TV and studying. That's when she met my grandmother. Your grandma was lonely because her son's family had moved abroad and she couldn't see them at all. So, I started having meals at her house sometimes, and we became close. I had no idea about that. So, actually, I know a lot about you, Chris. Like how you started wetting the bed again due to mental stress and had difficulty adjusting to an unfamiliar environment. Having my most embarrassing past brought up, I panicked. "Hey, Grandma, what else did you share with her?" Chloe laughed in amusement as you shouted without thinking. "Grandma said whenever you returned, you always visited her. She always talked happily about how you got into Stanford University, graduated from law school, and became a lawyer. So we're the same." However, as my grandmother talked about me happily, she seemed to start expressing more worries. It was probably around the time I started struggling between my ideals and reality. And finally, I ended up jobless. "I told your grandma to let me know if there was anything I could do. Then she said she wanted me to help you when you started to recover a little." So, I had been waiting for that time. Hearing about my situation from my grandmother from time to time, Chloe asked the director to post a job opening when I had started to recover a little. Actually, the director kept asking me if I needed a paralegal to fill the vacancy, but I had been stalling. She must have thought of me, who had quit practicing my profession in disappointment, and sought my grandmother's tender, loving care to heal the wound. She told my grandmother about the job's posting at the perfect timing, and my grandmother tapped on the application screen with a straight face, saying, "How about this one?" And I followed that guidance perfectly and applied to the law firm where Chloe works. Wow, I was led along so well. How embarrassing. I covered my face with both hands, feeling ashamed, but Chloe just laughed. Your grandma had been thinking about how to go about it. She thought if she said, "I have an acquaintance there," you might be wary, and if she applied for you without permission, you might cancel it. I recall conversations with my grandmother. Grandma's a good actress. But I was drawn to the catchphrase, "We welcome applicants keen to detail." As I said that, Chloe chuckled. "That's amazing. You know, your grandma told me that. She said if I included those words, you might be drawn to it." I looked up at the sky. I was no match for my grandmother, even though I had barely spent any time together. My grandmother knew everything. So that's why. She praised me for even the smallest things. It was to give me confidence. When you said that, Chloe blushed a little. Even though I said to leave it to me, I didn't really know what to do. I just thought if you had lost confidence, I wanted you to regain it first. She praised you for everything, like a kind older sister. So that's what it was about. Realizing everything, you got fired up. "All right, then let's do our best for Mr. Nguyen." As I said that, feeling refreshed, Chloe's face clouded over. "What should we do?" "Of course, we'll aim for leniency, but what he did was still wrong." As Chloe groaned, you turned to her. "I think we should consider a plea bargain." Chloe's head shot up. "Mr. Nguyen could provide valuable information about the scam group. If we can convince him to admit his charges and cooperate, it could lessen his burden." At my suggestion, Chloe's eyes sparkled for a moment, but then she said, "Exactly. It might be our best shot at reducing his sentence and gaining insights into the larger operation." "Do you think he'll be willing to cooperate, though?" He seemed pretty adamant about his innocence. Based on his information, it might lead to a reduced sentence in the form of cooperation with the investigation. Chloe's expression gradually started to shine. "I can't forgive the ones who tricked Mr. Nguyen either. Let's prepare our strategy then. Convince him that this is his chance to make things right." Our plan was set. A plea agreement was reached and presented to the court for approval. The court accepted the plea agreement, and Mr. Nguyen pleaded no contender to the specified charges. The agreed-upon terms will be implemented. Chloe's skills were remarkable, and I was able to play an active role too. Chloe and I split into two. First, Chloe suggested to Mr. Nguyen to compensate for the damages. $5,000 was a huge sum for Mr. Nguyen. However, by showing sincerity, we may be able to reach a settlement and potentially reduce the severity of the charges. Chloe urged him to contact his family in Vietnam. Mr. Nguyen was hesitant at first, but Chloe persuaded him, saying, "What would your precious family think if they found out later that you were sent to jail in America? What if they found out later that they could have prevented it if they had tried harder? I would be heartbroken." At Chloe's persuasion, Mr. Nguyen contacted his family in tears. His family rallied and raised money for him. It didn't reach the full amount, but the victim understood their sincerity. On the condition that they compensate for the remaining amount, a settlement was reached, and they even obtained a letter pleading for a reduced sentence. As for me, I scrambled around based on the information I got from Mr. Nguyen. The cell phone he had used to communicate with Mr. Nguyen had already been disconnected, but by following the trail, I obtained small clues. I had the police create a sketch based on Mr. Nguyen's testimony and pursue the man who had instructed him. I went to Mr. Nguyen's boarding house and asked his coworkers if anyone had received a similar proposal as him. As a result of providing such information, the police were able to successfully expose the wire fraud group. Cheers! On the night of obtaining the nolo contender to the specified charges, Chloe and I held a celebration party at a regular tavern. We were both excited and in high spirits, and the alcohol flowed. After a while, Chloe put her elbow on the table, her cheeks flushed, and stared at me. After being stared at for a while, I got flustered. "What is it? Is there something on my face?" Chloe shook her head, her expression serious. Especially in the crime court hearing, there were times when we hurled insults at each other in a strong tone. I, who was not suited for argument by nature, had put on a brave face and tried my best for the client. But when I quit my profession, I realized I wasn't cut out for that world. At her sudden suggestion, my drunkenness sobered up. "Huh? Why?" I squeezed out my voice. Chloe's expression didn't change. "From this case, I realized that you're an amazing person who truly stands by the client." I averted my gaze from Chloe's eyes that pierced through me with a serious expression. "It's too late now. Besides, if I want to stand by the client, I can do that sufficiently as your paralegal." Chloe lightly tapped the table. "That's a waste." Those words pierced me deeply. "I mean, if you stay as my paralegal, you can only save one person, right? If you become a lawyer, you and I can save two people, right?" I hung my head. "But I don't think I'm cut out to be a lawyer." At my words, Chloe furrowed her brow. "The biggest reason I left my profession was my shame in not being able to properly defend my clients. But there was one more reason. I had been exhausted by the intense exchanges in court. Especially in court hearings, there were times when we exchanged insults in a strong tone. I, who was not suited for confrontation by nature, put on a brave face and tried my best for the client. However, when I quit my job, I realized I really wasn't cut out for that world." Hearing my reason, Chloe puffed out her cheeks. "Coward." With one word, she pierced my weak spot. "With that attitude, you'll never be able to date me." I was taken aback by the bombshell she abruptly dropped. "What? Huh? Why?" Chloe pursed her lips, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I know. You have a crush on me, don't you?" I turned bright red and stammered. "No." "Well, you're drunk, right?" "That's right. You're drunk, Chloe." At my accusation, Chloe slowly shook her head. "Did you forget who my source of information is?" The image of my grandmother's smirking face popped into my head. I held my head in my hands. "You talk about me a lot, don't you? Like how I'm kind and amazing and wonderful." Living with just your grandmother was a bit lonely. To dispel that lonely atmosphere, you often talked a lot. However, since the only topic was about Chloe, I ended up talking about her. While I was holding my head, Chloe muttered to herself, "Beautiful and cute, and I love her so much." "Hey, I didn't tell Grandma that much." When I protested, Chloe grinned. "Oh, so you didn't tell Grandma that? What about in your heart?" Faced with her provocative expression, I was knocked out. "I do think that." When I honestly confessed, Chloe's face suddenly turned bright red. Even though she had been provoking you until now, she suddenly got embarrassed. "I didn't think you'd admit it so readily." Chloe covered her cheeks with both hands. "Since you've said that much, will you go out with me?" When I asked, sounding a little sulky, Chloe puffed out her chest. "If you pass the California State Bar exam and become a lawyer, just as you thought." "This again." Chloe gently touched your hand. "I mean, it's such a waste. Truly, you have a greater ability to be there for people than I do, and you're smarter than me, right?" I firmly gripped Chloe's hand, which had gently touched mine. "Huh?" I leaned in close to Chloe, who looked a little flustered. "It's a promise. I'll get it right away. Don't regret it later when the time comes." Then, you brought Chloe's hand closer to you. Is it okay? I think I can do my absolute best with this." With that preface, I kissed Chloe's hand. Chloe turned red up to her ears. That expression was so adorable. And then, a few years later, our wedding reception was about to come to a close. After finishing reading the letter to our parents, we called my grandmother under the spotlight. Not understanding what was going on, my grandmother was led by the staff and came in front of us. I took the microphone in my hand. "Grandma, thank you for always worrying about me." At those words, my grandmother's eyes grew a little moist. "Thank you for conveying everything I said to Chloe like a speaker." Those words elicited laughter from the entire venue. Grandma whistled, looking the other way. What a playful grandma. But thanks to that, I'm now married to Chloe. I was also able to get my lawyer's license in California. Thank you for making me late-night snacks and cheering me on during my exam studies. Then, Chloe held out a small package. It was the flowers Grandma had grown in the garden, preserved so they wouldn't wither. Encased in glass, they could be enjoyed for several years. Like the flowers in the garden, please stay healthy and watch over us forever. When I said that, Grandma nodded with a smile. Chloe and I smiled at each other. The me now was made possible by my parents' care, my grandmother's love, and Chloe's encouragement. Now it's my turn to give back. I want to live by being there for these warm people and for the clients who come to me for help.